Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Today's date is the 28th of November 2014, and I'm currently in Israel, actually in Jerusalem, near the old city. Left Odessa, Ukraine, stayed in Kiev for a few days, now here in Jerusalem. Just to let you know, Truth Sentinel travels to places of interest. Sometimes I'll show some maybe videos of me on location. Apologies for the quality at the moment. I did buy quite a good camera phone, but I lost it in Ukraine, so I've had to switch to an older phone, kindly donated by someone, and it's a bit grainy, but you know, it'll do for now. Later on, when we can upgrade equipment, maybe I'll make some nicer videos of locations where we are. So here's some grainy video of Kiev in the Maidan area. So this is the center of Kiev in the Maidan area. Here's me, and these candles represent people who've lost their lives since the troubles began. And this is the very street where the snipers killed protesters. So this is episode 33, and that's the same as the highest degree in the Masons, I believe, so well done for getting this far. If you've missed on any in the past, go check them out. Previous episode was about cults, religions, etc. Part 1. This is part 2 of cults and religions, concentrating on Waco, Mormonism and other stuff. Before that was political correctness, and the one before that was about nuclear disasters, so go and check those out if you haven't yet. I've started putting icons on the main cover picture, as some people have said that they all look the same and it's difficult to distinguish between episodes, which is a fair point. So I'll put some icons on the left now with pictures that related to the episode topic, which should provide some visuals to identify the episodes better. Quick appeal again for shares. Please post episodes on Facebook, share with friends, download, upload, tweet on Twitter. Appreciate help with that. It's probably the main thing I need to do at the moment, is to increase the amount of listeners. Always looking for help to run this community show. Doesn't need to be a big commitment, but here's some things that you could do to help. Any people who can really help with promotions, like doing publicity stunts, or if you've got a site where you could upload the videos, then please get in contact. If you're a radio station, please get in contact. You could broadcast this show onto the radio waves. Or if you know someone in a radio station, contact them, ask if they'd like to air our podcast. Also, please donate if you can on our YouTube channel. If you click on the About section, you should find the donation link. Also, if you go to the Truth Sentinel website, which is on Wix, I'll give the address out later. We need donations to help with buying equipment, upgrading, buying video cameras, bigger and better microphones, helping with travel costs, those kind of things, helping with donations sometimes that we want to give if we have a guest to come on. Can't do much of that at the moment, but would like to. Quality control. If you hear any mistakes, things that haven't been edited out, then let me know the time point on the video. Maybe I can go do that. Use the voicemail, chat room, not being used much at the moment, but I believe it will when we have more listeners, basically. Researchers, if you're particularly good at researching a particular topic, contact us, let us know the topic you'd like to research, and I'll let you know if it's beneficial. scottsentinel9@gmail.com. So just to let you know what's coming up on today's show. Have a quick look at the mainstream news, probably a brief one today, as I want to get on with the show. Then we'll continue talking about religion, cults, more from Tony Ortega on Scientology, and more from Anthony and Seth. We'll put together a Scientology podcast after this one, with our chat with Karen de la Carrière and the rest of Tony Ortega's interview. I might put full interview with Tony Ortega along with Karen's, so that it's a standalone episode. So today's news. I'm in Jerusalem, so it'd probably be good to start with some news there. Israel's Internal Security Service says it's uncovered a Hamas cell in the West Bank that was planned to carry out a series of attacks in Jerusalem. Whilst walking around Jerusalem, I've noticed the security here is pretty intense. There's soldiers, security everywhere, People are armed to the teeth around here. Well, the military are anyway. Tensions have been rising in Jerusalem since the summer. Basically, the two sides, Israel and Palestine, are further apart than ever. And you can feel the tension here if you walk in the city centre. At the same time, I did feel relatively safe. Well, with all these guys with guns around, in some ways that kind of does make you feel safe, because if anything's going to happen, they're there to protect you, hopefully. Benjamin Netanyahu insists there's no plans to change the rules at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque, Temple Mount, that bans Jews from praying there and people who are non-Muslims, basically. And I experienced that today, as I said, turned away from there because I wanted to go and have a look at that. Other news about unrest. Apparently it's calmed down in Ferguson following many nights of unrest and protest over the killing of the black teenager Michael Brown, and then the decision not to prosecute the officer Darren Wilson. And I think with that situation, as I said to Seth later in today's episode, I think the damage is already done with the relationship between the public and the police, and that's what this is about. No deal as yet, with talks going on between US and Iran over nuclear energy and whether Iran should be allowed to have it, basically. Never understood how Western powers don't see the hypocrisy in telling other countries that they can't have nuclear power or weapons, but it's all right for them to have them. It's simple, you know, if Western powers want to dictate like that, then they need to get rid of their weapons. Get rid of their nuclear weapons. And you know what, even get rid of their nuclear power, because it's been shown that that is going to pollute the atmosphere, and there's always going to be nuclear disasters. One after the other, over an extended period of time. I don't think nuclear energy, well, in the form that it's in at the moment, is a safe form of energy. Let me know what you think about that. The Pope is visiting Turkey, apparently trying to bridge gaps between religions. You know, there obviously are gaps between religions. You know, like I said, I went to see the Dome of the Rock at Temple Mount. It was heavily guarded due to recent problems there. There was a call to the prayer. People were bustling towards the temple. I was stopped and turned away, as they obviously decided I was not a Muslim. Now they're right, but it's interesting that they had religiously profiled me just from how I look. I saw them turning away other lighter-skinned people, with one insisting he was a Muslim. He eventually got through. No voicemails today. Please comment on our videos and let us know what you think about these topics, and then I can put your voicemail on the show. So last episode we talked about cults. We're going to continue with more from Tony Ortega next, and I'll put the full interview up on the episode I do about Scientology with Karen de la Carrière. So here's the next part of our conversation with Tony Ortega on Scientology. You may have caught the first sort of 10 to 15 minutes on the last episode 32. If you haven't, you can always go back and listen to that, or just wait for the full episode on Scientology that's coming up soon. But anyway, here's the second part of Tony Ortega on Scientology. Okay, so L. Ron Hubbard founded it. I understand David Miscavige is now the leader. Do you think he genuinely believes that Scientology is a good force for people, or does he have other motivations?
I think I believe, I've been told by people who work very closely with him that he speaks in a way that would suggest he genuinely believes in L. Ron Hubbard and the technology. So, you know, for example, when you're going through these processes to remember what happened to you millions of years ago, you bump into things like what they call implants, and there's also these foreign entities that are part of you. And as you're dealing with those, you go through some what they call blowing charge, which I guess would be like we're going into our past and finding these electronic nodes and dissipating them, and it causes a physical reaction. And he believed so much in blowing off charge that he actually had special copper wires and these sort of tubes installed at the international base so you could grab hold of them and blow charge off and then, you know, go off into the ground or something. I mean, really bizarre things that you wouldn't bother to do if you didn't at least, you know, believe that there was some truth to it. And yeah, he talks as if he really believes that Scientology does what Hubbard said it would. But he also, there's another side to Scientology besides the past lives and getting rid of your active mind, and that is Hubbard wrote millions of words about control and interrogation, and that part David Miscavige thoroughly adheres to, and in some ways he's made things very Orwellian inside Scientology, and he's driving people away. I mean, that's the real story of Scientology today, is that it's shrinking and it's going through some really terrible crises right now, and David Miscavige is so kind of hardcore and by the book. He's unable to deal with the fact that he's longtime Scientologists are becoming very disillusioned and walking away. Even some that still adhere to Hubbard, and that's what we've seen the last few years. Is so interesting. Is you see people coming out of Scientology that still like Hubbard and still like these ideas, but they just can't take Miscavige anymore. So he's got a real issue on his hands, and I just don't see him moderating things at all.
And he did know L. Ron Hubbard, didn't he? And he grew up in Scientology.
He was a young kid in South Philly who had some asthma, and his dad first discovered Dianetic Scientology and thought that there might be a solution for his son, got his son into it. They ended up moving to England, and David was still just a young guy, and he became an auditor at, I don't know, I think something like only 12 years old or something like that. And Lawrence Wright wrote a story that one of the things he apparently, he took some steroidal medicine for his asthma, and it made him kind of a little bit, kind of on edge and aggressive. And the famous story was told in St. Hill in England was that he ended up punching his own subject. In Scientology and counseling, you have an auditor and a pre-clear, it's called. The subject is the pre-clear. And so David became famous because he slugged his pre-clear. Then he ended up going to America, back to the United States, and to California, where Hubbard was living, I think in either 77 or 78. Hubbard was living in near the Palm Springs area, and he had a kind of a large spread. And at that point, Hubbard had decided to get into making films. I think he was inspired by Star Wars. He realized that, after all, he had spent the 30s and 40s writing space opera, and now suddenly space opera was actually popular with the public. So he decided he wanted to make this major epic film, but first needed to learn the techniques, and so he got a crew together of his followers, and they started making these little training films. And I'm told they're just absolutely unwatchable. But there's great photographs of these folks making these films, and you can see Hubbard up there with, telling people what to do, and there's this really little guy handling one of the cameras, and that was David Miscavige. So I believe there was a 4-person camera unit, 2 people on film cameras, 2 people on video cameras, and Miscavige's job was to run one of those. So he was definitely in the presence of the old man himself. But then what happened was in '77 there was an FBI raid, and Hubbard had to go into hiding for a while, and he no longer trusted a lot of the people that had been running his intelligence unit stuff, and so he started to turn things over to the younger generation, and that's how David Miscavige started his rise to the top. Hubbard died in '86, and by then Miscavige had already consolidated a lot of his power, and ever since then Miscavige has been totally in control.
And you mentioned the auditors. Do they get paid for doing that?
Do auditors get paid? That's a good question. Well, yeah, it depends on the situation. The way Scientology, and Miscavige is changing this in a way that's making it tough on people in the church. The way it used to work is you used to have people in the field, and they would try to bring in people to start people in Scientology, and people actually built businesses in their own homes where I'll bring somebody in, I'll audit them through the first or train them through the first level of classes, and then move them on to the central org, it's called, short organization, and those people made a very good living. They would make they didn't charge a lot for those low-level courses, but on a $300 course, they'd get like 10% of it. And if you get enough pre-clears coming through, some of these people did really well. And then you're supposed to send them on to the org for the middle part of what's called their bridge to total freedom. And then once they get through that middle portion, start to get to the upper levels, then they have to go to what's called advanced orgs, and there were only a few advanced orgs in the world. Now, at the orgs and the advanced orgs, the staff was paid very little. So the real money was in the people that were in the field. And in recent years, Miscavige has decimated those field auditors. I've talked to a number of them that, he started replacing the orgs with what he calls ideal orgs, and he wants people to do as much as possible in those buildings. And so he has pushed away these people that were working in the field. So now it's just the staff, and the staff are paid very little. Staff who work in the orgs don't make a lot of money. They don't get paid as little as the Sea Org, but most of them have second jobs because it's really low pay. And then there's the Sea Org. These are the people who dedicated their whole lives to Scientology, who work 112 hours a week, and they sign billion-year contracts. There's 3,000 or 4,000 of them in the world, and they really do the inner workings of the church, and they get paid 30 or 40 cents an hour.
You were joking about billion-year contracts, right? I mean, when you're talking about past lives and going back millions of years, just checking.
No, I'm not kidding. I've had copies of them. They believe that you've lived countless times in the past and you'll live countless times in the future, and this current body you're walking around in is just something very temporary. And so when you sign on for the Sea Org, you promise, I will serve for 1 billion years. And you sign that document. And, the church in the past has said, oh, it's just symbolic. But no, I mean, you talk to anybody that's been in the Sea Org, and they really believed it. Yeah, I'm signing on for the duration, And they, like I said, they get paid, 30, 40, 50 bucks a week, and they're working like 112 hours. Sleep deprivation is definitely part of the control processes. And so there's no real career that makes much sense inside Scientology. But those field people and people who recruit for them, they're called FSMs, field staff members, and they can make pretty good money, or they could in the past. Like I said, in recent years, Miscavige seems to have been cracking down and excommunicating some of those folks. I think it's because he wants more people to be in the buildings, and it's not really working.
Okay, now I read that Scientologists don't particularly like being called a cult. Now, would you say they are a cult? Is Scientology a cult, in your opinion?
Yeah, I try not to get into that argument because, is it a religion or is it a cult? Because there's just no real good definition of the word cult. It means one thing to some people and something else to other people. They are, I call them the Church of Scientology because they call themselves the Church of Scientology. They have tax-exempt status, and if they are a church, why are they forcing young women to have abortions? Why are they splitting up families? Why are they paying 10-year-old children, 30 or 40 cents an hour? I'd rather discuss what their behavior is, and the fact that they imprison people on something called the RPF for years at a time. I'd rather talk about their behaviors than argue, the definition of a word. I mean, they're a destructive group. There's no question about it. And it's been exposed time and time again since the 50s that, they treat people so poorly and get away with it because they call themselves a church. But, you can go through, I know Rick Ross real well, who's a cult expert, and he's very careful about why he calls something a cult. We can go through that, but I just feel like you end up getting in a big argument about, well, don't all churches do this or all churches do that? And it seems like it's a big waste of time to me. I'm more interested in the specific things that Scientology does and not getting caught up in arguments like that.
Okay, no, fair enough. You mentioned about some people getting paid 40 cents an hour. Isn't that illegal in the States?
Well, that's where that religious cloaking comes in, because churches can pay people what they want because they claim it's religious work. Now, if you actually talk to people who are in a Sea Org, they'll tell you they were, cleaning toilets out with toothbrushes and clearing land and printing books, and there's anything but religious. So when you ask Scientology about Sea Org, they compare it to a monastery. They say it's like monks, but if you actually talk to Sea Org members, they'll say there's nothing spiritual going on. It's just manual labor for 30 cents, 40 cents an hour, but they can get away with it because whenever anybody's challenged it in the court, there was one not too long ago, they just say, hey, we're a religion, we don't have to follow those rules. So a couple, Mark and Claire Headley left Scientology in 2005. They literally had to escape the secretive international base east of Los Angeles, and they sued under those. And that was, a lot of people sued for different reasons, but their particular suit was about that, the labor law, how can you have us trapped on a base working for pennies an hour in the United States. And, they just ran into that problem, that it's so difficult to sue something that calls itself a church under labor laws, and they lost.
So let us know what you think. Next, we're going to go to Seth Davis from Too Real News. Last week, Seth looked at some American cults, and he's going to continue today looking at Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Ku Klux Klan. When I was working in the States many years ago, during the summer, I was working on a Jewish camp as a driver, and I heard stories of the Ku Klux Klan coming onto the camp with burning crosses, and I was quite shocked that still went on, but apparently it does. And let's go over to Seth now to continue our conversation. Hello, Seth.
Hey there, Scott.
Welcome back to Truth Sentinel.
It's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you. I'm here in Kiev, Ukraine now, so I've had a good chance to have a look down at Maidan area. I went down there yesterday. How's things where you are?
Oh, things where I am here in Washington have actually been pretty good, all things considered. We've this summer we missed a lot of the heat wave that hit the rest of the West Coast there of like Southern Oregon and California, but we also have missed a lot of the cold wave that has hit the rest of the United States. So it's been kept pretty cold here. Snow levels have dropped to about 3,500 feet, and I'm at about 1,400 here, about 1,400, and it's not so bad, actually. It got pretty cold there for a while. It was freezing over. Now it's pretty much just rainy. Supposedly with this Michael Brown thing, though, in Seattle, out here in my area, there were some protests that went on that apparently sparked off a bit, and quite a few crimes that went on simultaneous with the protests that don't necessarily have to be related to them at all, but are just opportunists using the fog of the protest there, essentially, or the confusion caused by it, to commit their own respective crimes.
Yeah, I heard it was spreading to other cities as well. Is that right?
Yep. Oh, that's the Seattle thing there. Chicago, where Pete is, supposedly all over, like most major cities in the U.S., L.A. and all that.
Mm. Yeah, I was looking at I was actually looking into the story today. What's your take on what actually went down there? It's difficult to tell from listening to the witnesses and, the policemen. What do you actually think happened?
Since none of us really know 100% what happened, you can't say definitively, but at the same time I don't know. There are quite a few people running around that can act ridiculously and be thuggish and whatnot, but at the same time, even if we were to say or assume there, which it can be quite a dangerous thing to assume, that Michael Brown was some criminal there or whatever, does that necessarily give the police officer or cop, whatever you want to call him, the right to unload his weapon into him?
No, not at all. I mean, I was thinking, regardless of what happened in this situation, the police are to blame anyway. The police that have done this in previous situations. Thousands
of people every year, Scott. Because I mean, it's what's reported by the FBI statistics from 6 years ago is that about 400 Americans are killed by police every single year, and that was on a voluntary basis. That only took about 4% of U.S. police departments, local police departments, that reported their officer-involved shooting deaths. and thus leading to, if you go by the numbers, multiply that 400 by about 25 there, and you get a number around, well, exactly 10,000.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this situation is a result of those situations rather than it just being any single situations. It's people's complete distrust of the government and the police because of what they've been up to.
Oh, the police specifically, because the police are the local face of the government on the ground there. And I mean, somebody pointed out that about 330 people have been shot and killed in the U.S. since this Michael Brown thing.
Yeah, and it's not just in the USA. I mean, here I am in Ukraine, and I went down to the Maidan yesterday, and it's hard to believe that all this stuff happened on that street. It's like a busy main street that runs through all the shops and the main center, and there was there was police and snipers killing everyone around there.
Yep. And vice versa. Well, because I mean, the snipers are killing people on both sides to get them incited, and I think that's kind of what happened with the Ferguson deal. There is a lot of the protesting and whatnot was interspersed by different groups. That's why some people were continuing to protest regardless, and then there are other people that had a mind to commit crime there from the beginning, and most people don't just go with a mind to protest and then start to riot. It's people that had a criminal mind in the first place that go out there that start all of this. And then vice versa, there's people on both sides that want to play the game. And then there's some people that span that because, I mean, we'll cover this later with the Ku Klux Klan and the inverse of that there, what was being covered at Ferguson, the new Black Panther Party. The FBI has already infiltrated the new Black Panther Party through COINTELPRO. If you ever heard of that program, that was back in, I believe, the 70s. Was infiltrating the civil rights movement and all sorts of other what they called like subversive groups like the local Communist Party and such like that.
Right, yeah, I mean, I saw some video of what was going on there in Ferguson from InfoWars, and it did remind me of the London riots when we had people setting fire to buildings and stuff there. And I don't think you can have any serious uprising or protest without some of those criminal elements joining in.
Oh, agreed. Because there are many an opportunist that'll look at that as their chance to get away with whatever crime that they originally had planned to get away with.
Yeah, and then the media just sort of paint it as though everybody's in on it. They're all just criminals.
Agreed.
Anyway, let's move on to the second part of cults, which we were talking about before, and I'm sure some of these things will crop up anyway.
Oh, always.
Well, what did you want to talk about in part 2 of our cults program?
Okay, well, we're going to cover 3 cults as we did last time there, just for the sake of time. The Watchtower Society, otherwise known to some as the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Ku Klux Klan, who we were just talking about there, and Mormonism. 2 of these being Christian cults. I mean, consider the Ku Klux Klan to be a quote-unquote Christian terrorist organization, although these guys are burning crosses, are anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic, which ironically, if you're supposed to be Christian following the teachings of Christ, Christ was Jewish. So
are you telling me the Ku Klux Klan are supposed to be Christian?
That's how some people would like to paint it, especially the atheist community or agnostic community. That is, let me rephrase that, the militant agnostic or atheist community that really likes bashing religious types would try and include them as a religious organization.
Yeah,
Technically,
I mean,
they do have smatterings of what one could consider like Christian cultism mixed with Masonics. But of course, many Christian sects are interspersed with all sorts of Masonic teachings. So it's 6 to 1, half dozen to the other.
Yeah, if Jesus was back down on Earth, I'm not sure he'd be joining the Ku Klux Klan somehow.
Well said.
I'm off to Israel tomorrow myself, so I'm hoping to go and have a look at a lot of the biblical sites. Well,
that'll be very interesting. I like getting your perspective on a lot of this, specifically even just Odessa to Kiev there. That's a very interesting jump because you get to see a little bit more of, I don't know, the central power structure of quote-unquote like Western Ukraine versus Odessa, whereas Odessa is even more of like a lot more of a beautiful area there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time I've been in the center of Kiev, because previously I've come here just for the odd day or so,
Yeah.
and I haven't really liked it. And Anthony, who you know appears on this
Mhm.
show sometime, he really likes Kiev, and I haven't really warmed to it. But I must admit, being right in the center, it's quite nice. And I've just been hanging out in cafes, and I've noticed there's a lot of military types around.
Yeah.
Some official looking, some more like a ragtag sort of makeshift
Maybe a
army.
mercenary.
It seems like all the little groups that were here during the protest, they're all milling around in the cafes, and it could all start up again at some point. Who knows?
Oh, agreed. Agreed. And I think some of those are very legitimate individuals within Kiev or within any of the cities there in Ukraine, or Western Ukraine specifically. And a lot of them, unfortunately, are also foreign mercenaries and then neo-Nazi government provocateurs.
Yeah. I mean, there's also at the same time as seeing them sort of tucked away in cafes, it's also still a fairly good atmosphere here. There's lots of candles in the centre representing the people who've died in their troubles so far. There's massive propaganda posters. That's what they look like to me, from the army, sort of army recruitment posters for the Ukrainian army.
Like an Uncle Sam sort of a thing. Uncle Sam wants you.
Well, it's just like big pictures of Ukrainian army guys helping the sick and helping people
Children.
and doing cooking and stuff. It's weird.
Yep.
I can only assume it's propaganda posters for
Of the most base, simplistic kind. Every government engages in it, especially with military propaganda.
Yeah, and on the other side of the road, there's more sort of civilian photos of people have stuck up all the way along the road of people, during the riots, and with blood and people suffering and being shot. And, yeah, it's.
I think that's one of the most important lessons. As we get a little bit off topic here, one of the most important lessons of all of that is that war, violence, and all that really is hell for the people that are there, and all these other forces get to go home. If they get to go home at all, be it in a body bag or not, the people that are there, that is their home. They're stuck there. They've got to clean up. And as you've seen there, they've done a fairly good job of cleaning everything up, but the violence, the bloodshed, the sadness is all still very heavy on their minds because it's very fresh in their minds.
Yeah, indeed. There's a lot of people there sort of taking pictures and stuff. I don't usually take photos or videos, to be honest, but I'm starting to think, if I'm visiting these locations, I want to do some videos, and so I took a really dodgy one on a telephone. I'm going to see. I might stick it on the episode if it comes out okay, but at some point, I definitely need to upgrade my equipment and buy some decent video cameras and stuff.
Agree, but we're all like working class people here, Scott. No, we don't have a multi-million-dollar bankroll behind us. I mean, the great things we could do if we did, but
Well, if there is a multi-millionaire or billionaire listening, then please feel free to invest. That's all I can say.
Always.
Anyway, let's crack on. So
yeah.
the first. Are we talking about Watchtower then?
No, we'll be starting. We're starting in a weird order here with the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan.
Okay, that'd be interesting. Yeah. I sort of came across them once. Many years ago, I think in the early '90s, I went and did a little bit of work in the States in which area? North Carolina, I think it was. Would that be consistent with the Ku Klux Klan? Sort of.
Yeah, well that's technically still American South right there.
I was working on a Jewish camp and a Jewish summer camp as part of the Camp America sort of overseas scheme, and I was working as a driver there just for the summer. And apparently I didn't actually see this, but apparently they came on the camp with a burning cross. And so they had to
Seems very Christian, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it was a Jewish camp, so they were still active in the area. But I found that weird, but yeah, so they're still going strong then.
Yeah, well, allegedly there's been 3 different incarnations of the Klan. There's the first Klan, which was what was it, like immediately after the Civil War, so like 1865 to the mid 1870s. And then they pretty much had died out there. There were still other like white supremacist groups or whatever, like anti-Republican, like Southern Democrat groups. Because while I'm nonpartisan on both sides there, I do find it fairly ironic that the modern-day Democrats push so much propaganda against the modern-day Republicans as being like the party of the Ku Klux Klan and all this stuff, when the vast majority of Klan members in government have been Democrats, but also historically, but also that the original purpose of the first incarnation of the Klan, immediately after the Civil War, was to kill and chase out white Republicans and newly freed slaves, many of whom became Republicans because of that exact thing there, Abraham Lincoln being the first Republican president.
Yeah, I'm still always of the opinion that a lot of these parties they pretend to be different, but they're all.
No, I agree. I agree.
All the
It's
same,
just,
you know?
I've always found that kind of an interesting double standard stereotype there, because it's like all these groups like to deny history when it doesn't coincide with their specific propaganda points.
They'll deny anything if it doesn't coincide with their point. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll deny that the sun is a major influencer of climate.
Yeah, if they have to. Yeah.
Love it. But there's the second incarnation of the Klan. Peaked here, they had about from 1915 to about 1944, and the membership then, you're looking about 3 to 6 million people estimates, and then died out for quite a while there. And then the third incarnation of the Klan, which is all the way to like modern day now, and that's between 5,000 and 8,000 people total.
How do they
smaller, but they still exist.
How do they recruit now?
Pretty much the same way they've always recruited. They're just finding the least educated, most hateful people they can. And unfortunately, some of those people can even be in government, because you can be fairly intelligent and not be wise. You can be a fairly intelligent person and still be a hate monger or a whatever, a supremacist. And ironically enough, many people that would be considered quote-unquote white would never be able to join the Ku Klux Klan, as these are a very Northwestern European sort of a group there.
Yeah.
Which is even if further irony. I mean, the third Klan now is what is the modern-day Ku Klux Klan is known for. It's anti-communism sentiments, it's anti-Semitic sentiments, it's homophobia, it's Islamophobia, it's neo-Nazism, it's anti-miscegenation, which is interracial marriage or breeding there, whatever you want to call it, and then white supremacy. This is all what they're known as there.
So they've got.
They're pretty much. They're called a far-right group, which once again being ironic due to the fact of its mainly Democratic roots, and the fact that still everybody from what's his name there, Harry S. Truman to Robert Byrd, Douglas White or Edward Douglas White, Hugo Black, Rice Means, Bibb Graves, Edward L. Jackson, Warren G. Harding, David Duke, all sorts of people in American government have been Klan members, even if just paying their initial membership fee. Some of these guys all the way up to like, Exalted Cyclops or whatever, Supreme Kleagle or whatever. They have a plethora of ridiculous names, which is a definite holdover from the Masonic influences there.
Presumably they're...
the Masons love their names and titles as well.
Presumably they're secret members if they're in government. Sort of well-known.
Some, not so much, because modern day, yes. Historically, no, because we've got all the way up until the 1930s, 1940s, and heck, in the case of the early civil rights movement, the antithesis of that, all the way up to the 1960s and 70s. And in the case of David Duke, all the way up, I mean, he's no longer a current member of government there, but he still holds quite a bit of sway. David Duke is a Klansman there, or a white supremacist in his modern day, what he would call himself now. But still, it's ridiculous. So it's not quite so secret. Some of it is secret, and some of these people, especially those that try and pretend to be pro equality there or whatever, that actually have those sentiments, are secretive about it. But there are quite a few that aren't so secretive about it.
And they featured at Ferguson as well, right?
Yes, they featured at Ferguson. By, let's see, even here out of Russia Today even covered it, Missouri KKK, we will use, quote, lethal force against Ferguson protesters. And I mean, we'll get into COINTELPRO or COINTELPRO and everything like that, but keeping it going here with the Ferguson part, Battle of Ferguson 2, Anonymous faces off with Klan and Op KKK. And I've been suspicious suspicious of a lot of elements of Anonymous. There are some very legitimate elements of them, but there are also, because there's no faces, there's no names, there's no anything like that, so it's extremely easy for a government, like, entity there or whatever, to set up fake anonymous profiles or anonymous memes, messages, calls for action there, especially with the violence and everything. They're supposedly waging war against the Ku Klux Klan, who, as we just talked about there in government, has always had quite a bit of an influence. But going here now to thirdworldtraveler.com/FBI/COINTELPRO Untold Story, about a third of the way down, we've got here the section titled "The Ku Klux Klan." Also, Ku Klux it's not Klu Klux, it's Ku Klux because the word comes from the Greek kuplos, meaning circle, which is supposed to mean band of brothers or circle of brothers, is the literal English translation of Ku Klux Klan. But during the 1960s, the FBI's role was not to protect civil rights workers, but rather, through the use of informants, the Bureau actively assisted the Ku Klux Klan in their campaign of racist murder and terror. The Church Committee hearings and internal FBI documents revealed that more than 1/4 of all active Klan members during that period were FBI agents or informants. 44, however, Bureau intelligence, quote, assets were neither neutral observers nor objective investigators, but active participants in beatings, bombings, and murders that claimed the lives of some 50 civil rights activists by 1964.
That's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, well, just think about that. And then you've got guys like, what's his face, J. Edgar Hoover, that are extremely racist. Like, a hardcore racist, and also in his case, a weird, got his weird cross-dressing thing there, and this is the guy that has to have, all sorts of blackmail on everybody else, and this is also the guy that said organized crime didn't exist. There's no such thing as La Cosa Nostra. It's all disorganized crime. So a direct liar on that level, and also just a racist dirtbag, as unfortunately a lot of these Klansmen are. However, COINTELPRO fits in there pretty well by their destruction through agent provocateurs of the old or original Black Panther Party, and then setting up the quote-unquote new Black Panther Party, which is, rather than the old one, was a lot about a racial harmony and specifically just empowering people. And a lot of the people they were helping were poor black people. They're poor quote-unquote white people, poor quote-unquote brown people, or quote-unquote yellow people, red people, whatever you want to say. I mean, personally, I find using color terminology to describe individuals to be rather patronizing and ridiculous, but whatever, people tend to like to fall into those paradigms of thought, so let them do that. But the old party was actually about harmony and action against government and action against oppression, whereas the new Black Panther Party is essentially just an FBI provocateur hate group. They are. Essentially like the Nation of Islam, where they're an FBI provocateur hate group. They are. We can beat around the bush all day, and I'm not saying all Muslim people are, because the Nation of Islam is not recognized by the vast majority of Muslims. I mean, they're a cult in the United States that is racist. And is specifically about as much division as possible, to give as bad a name to Muslims and as bad a name to black activists as humanly possible.
And what would you say is the link between Ku Klux Klan, Black Panthers, and that? Would you say linked to cults?
It would be the FBI. The Black Panthers, the new Black Panthers, aren't necessarily really a cult so much as they are a political group. The Nation of Islam, who has also had people speak out there and everything with the exalted minister Louis Farrakhan and all that, they are what you'd consider a cult because the religious aspects there. People can be Black Panthers and be a religious Muslim, or be a member of the Nation of Islam or one of the offshoots like the 5 Percenters or something like that. But not necessarily. They don't have to be. And
the Ku Klux Klan, are you telling me they sort of hang out in churches and sort of pray and stuff, and then they go out and
some of
harass
them
people?
Can have that as their cover there or whatever, but it seems like obviously their membership with the Klan and their activities with the Klan would kind of directly contradict the teachings of Christ to the point that it would make them obvious hypocrites. And it's honestly, even the teachings of Muhammad there and whatnot are pretty directly contradicted by a lot of the hate-mongering of groups like the 5 Percenters or the Nation of Islam there. But the link between the Klan and the Black Panthers, who themselves were at Ferguson as well and were threatening violence against the Klan and violence against cops and all this, and want people to, like, we're going to have to, like, kill cops and vice versa there, and the Klan is going to have to kill protesters and drop in N-bombs and all this stuff. The FBI is the main connection between both of them, and the FBI, the Justice Department, has played up on every last quote-unquote racial incident that involves either a white a neighborhood watch guy or a white cop and a black victim there of this police murder, that if it were to be the other way around, or a black cop and a black victim, or a white cop and a white victim, or anything like that, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. The TV wouldn't pick it up, because after, as we've just covered there, many thousands of people have been murdered by police, and yet they don't. Where's their 15 minutes of fame on the TV? Where are the protests about them and all that?
Well, yeah. What about Kelly Thomas? To be honest, that was a situation that was well worth a nationwide protest. You know.
Oh, indeed, that was one of the most brutal murders to have ever been captured there, and yet. And
no confusion about it either. That guy was murdered. You know.
Yeah, straight up. There was no arguing about this, or like bullshitting, or beating around the bush, as it were. That was a straight up murder. And yet, so many people, because of the color of his skin, oh, well, you know, that's one case in which it happens. I understand. There's a large majority of the victims of police brutality happen to be African American or Hispanic or whatnot. However, there are quite a few Hispanic or African American cops that also engage in all sorts of police brutality, and vice versa. There are quite a few white victims of police brutality, and it's the problem is police brutality and the militarization of police, not just in the United States, but around the world. And yet, so many people would like to waylay the issue as much as possible by putting it down one of the many rabbit holes of racial division or ethnic division, whatever you want to say there, and just a bunch of crap. Because, I mean, really, none of these people, and I think we've talked about this before there, or I know I did with Pete, and I think I have with Corey Washington there, as well as quite a few other people, is none of these big groups, like even Anonymous or the New Black Panthers or the Klan or any of a number of citizen activist groups, really give a damn about Michael Brown or the police brutality. They're either pissed off about a lot of other stuff within their own lives, and it could even be involved in certain police brutality within their own lives, but in a lot of cases it's their own forms of subtle reverse racism, which is just actual racism, and wanting to get their 15 minutes of fame, waving the bloody shirt of a kid that got killed that they could really give a damn about. That if he was still alive and they'd see him on the street and he needed a hand, they would do nothing to help him. They could give a damn about him, and yet because his face is on the TV there, they want to get theirs.
Yeah, and I heard about that 12-year-old kid as well who was shot.
Oh, yeah, but that's everywhere. That stuff happens all the time for kids with either fake guns or with nothing. There are kids that get shot sometimes as, well, Pete and I covered there, I believe that was in Ohio as well. It's hypocritical of putting oneself up on a rock, on a stone there, and looking down upon somebody else from your ivory tower, as it were, or your high horse, when really they're just castles made of air, man. They're a bunch of fantasies that you yourself are without sin or without transgression there. And, you know, especially for stuff that's really not quite as malevolent as other stuff that actually matters. I've once told people this before. Everybody wants to freak out about so much stuff that really in the big picture doesn't matter, while subsequently ignoring everything that's actually a big deal. As we talked about before, with political correctness, people want to scream and cry and freak out and be hurt by bad words, yet they don't want to be offended by or scream at and hurt by physical violence, murder.
Yeah,
I find that interesting.
It is. It's very bizarre. Anything more to say on the? Oh,
Watchtower. Yes. They've got the idea of pyramids and everything, and what they call pyramidology or whatever, Egyptology and Masonics like that is very big in the Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, Charles Taze Russell himself is buried under a pink granite, which is big in occult. And also, if you've seen talk to like Brian Forrester and whatnot, pink granite has been, or Aswan granite, I believe it is as it's called there, is extremely important in the occultic world, as well as the ancient archaeological or ancient, whatever you'd say, world of building and construction, because of not only because of its piezoelectric or piezoelectric properties.
We'll be talking to Brian in a couple of episodes from now.
I don't know, things always just seem to tie together there pretty well, huh? Good. Also, here to add just of early examples of also like Masonics and whatnot within the Watchtower Society. The term Watchtower and the Watchtower Society comes from the Watchtower magazine, which was put out by Charles Taze Russell and the early Jehovah's Witnesses there. That's where that term comes from, and the Watchtower International and whatnot.
Yeah, no, I have seen that. When I was growing up, I saw those magazines floating around in various places.
Yeah, and you notice on the earliest ones, they don't. I don't think for the most part they have them anymore. But the earliest ones would always have the Masonic cross and crown on the cover, which is pretty interesting there. And I've also noticed the cross and crown on quite a few things of just like political stuff and whatnot. Just showing that the Masons are always there, always helping out, or the Masonic hourglass as they call it too there, which is like the hourglass with the big X through it and whatnot. But even here, modern day, this is going, some news you might know there, Scott, themirror.co.uk, Jehovah's Witnesses sex abuse scandal, church accused of cover-up to protect rapists and pedophiles. That's August 11th, 2014. Pretty recent. Well,
to be honest, the paedophile scandal over here just seems to, in the UK, just seems to spread to every single institution,
It's everywhere. Really is. Let's see. Just the subtitle on this is "Elders accused of brainwashing victims or threatening to have them shunned by their families and friends if they report abuse to the police." I'm going to be honest, though, man. Charles Taze Russell, similarly to Joseph Smith or Joseph Smith Jr., as it were, have some interesting history there as far as like sexual stuff and whatnot, and how women are treated in these Christian offshoot cults.
Badly, I would presume, yeah.
Oh, yeah. In this case, I mean, even modern day there, the Jehovah's Witnesses still have what the lawyer for this family there has described as the tip of the iceberg, likening it to the sex scandals which have rocked the Catholic Church. And as you and I both know, the Catholic Church sex scandal is far from being fully exposed. And I mean, the fact that Pope Francis there is so popular, really tell your Francis Bergoglio, was it not Benedict? What the hell's the new Pope?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, that guy though, the fact that he's so popular with everybody really tells you that he's done something to quell the sex scandal stuff, or he's quieted it, and that's why the Catholic Church has put its full backing behind him, and that's why the media has put their backing behind him.
Well, they love him because
he's still happening.
He's like a politician. He's adapted his entire religion to suit
what people want at the
populace,
moment.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed, which at that point, it's not really even a religion anymore. It has become complete politics. But then again, many would ask why we would just bring this up now, because the Catholic Church has been involved in being a political branch and not really being a religion for hundreds and hundreds of years, well over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
But going on there and moving, just Charles Taze Russell, let's see, among them, okay, chalice.com, okay. Some interesting here, just a little background, because I refuse to use Wikipedia this time around, again, at least for this specific case, so, you can thank me for that one.
Wikipedia is very useful. I mean, it's not.
I agree.
It's not good to use it in a sort of as a reference in a journal, but you can't help but use it. It's a very good.
Yeah,
system,
well, I do it for writing quite a bit of just a quick reference type thing for the average person, because quite a few people will use Wikipedia or Snopes or something like that. But I've seen quite a bit of biased information on all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, even Wikipedia itself includes the Ku Klux Klan as a Christian terrorist organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm just like, interesting perspectives there. But let's see, this is by, oh, man, Tim Chalice. Okay, there we go. A few weeks ago, I set out on a new series of articles in which I intend to scan the history of the church from its earliest days all the way to present time, to examine some of Christianity's most notorious false teachers. Along the way, we will visit such figures as Arius, Pelagius, Fosdick, and even a few you might find on television today. We continue this morning with a false teacher whose name has been nearly forgotten, even though his followers regularly knock on your door. His name is Charles Taze Russell, founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Charles Taze Russell was born was born on February 16th, 1852 in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. The second of 5 children born to Joseph and Ann Russell, Charles grew up in a devout home, and his parents were respected members of the Presbyterian Church. When he was young, his family moved to Pittsburgh, where his father came to own a number of haberdashery stores. In his early teens, Charles became a partner in this business and soon owned several locations. As a boy, Charles had a great deal of religious enthusiasm, and while still only a teenager, left the Presbyterian congregation to attend a congregational church. As a form of evangelism, he would often go to public locations and use chalk to write out Bible verses related to sin and damnation. But then, at the age of 16, he engaged a debate with a friend that led him to question the reliability of the Bible and the validity of the Christian faith. He embarked on a period of religious searching and dabbled in many Eastern religions before determining that they, too, were empty and unsatisfying. Though I would add as a caveat just here that they did imprint quite a bit on his perspective there also later, similarly to his early Christian days, which, you know what I mean, they like kind of coalesce into one big thing. Then he just adds his own stuff on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. When Charles was 18, he encountered an Adventist preaching and began regularly to attend a Bible study. It was not long before he determined that he could not reconcile an eternal hell with a merciful God, which is another thing with Jehovah's Witnesses, that they deny the existence of a real hell. Over the next 2 years, he came to question many other historic doctrines and became convinced that the historic creeds betrayed true Christianity. And then it just continues on. He starts his own cult there with the Watchtower Society. With his, eventually it moves by the 1880s to Brooklyn, New York, where they remain to this very day. Also, he just continues on. I think it's not the Jehovah's Witnesses. I believe that's the Mormons there that believe Enoch turned into the Archangel Metatron. Yeah.
Metatron.
Oh, also. Yeah, Metatron. Yeah, I know. Sounds like Megatron from Transformers. I thought that was a pretty good one. But this is another thing right there. Instead of hell actually being a place of God's wrath, they maintain that the soul simply just ceases to exist, or that becomes nothingness after death, if that's the case, because there's no such thing as hell. And then also they hold that Jesus is actually the Archangel Michael in human form, and that he was created essentially by God rather than being timeless with God in the actual Trinity there. And also the fact that these groups deny the group of the Trinity of being one, instead teaching it as being 3 individual groups.
It's interesting, isn't it? How these people just think they can completely make up their own religion.
Yeah, they just change it to suit themselves because this doesn't reconcile with their own personal beliefs of their experiences in life. Which it's ridiculous to me, because I'm like, if you're going to be a Christian, be a Christian. Go by the immediate dogma, or as guys like Mark Dice would call it, rather than Christian, because so many people have perverted that term to a follower of Christ. You really don't need all these different religious groups there and whatever denominations that like to have their own interpretation of what the Bible says or of what Christ says, when I myself am more of a literalist.
It does get very confusing for people when they've got all these different denominations.
Yeah, heck yeah. I think some people would say, as Pastor Stephen Anderson would say, that only serves, from a religious perspective, the devil's purpose there of dividing and confusing Christians, and also bastardizing or commercializing the Christian faith into leading more people to apostatize, because I can't tell you how many people that their count how many people I've even known there that have been raised Mormon or have family that are Mormon that apostatize to the point of becoming like militant atheists.
Yeah,
because they look at all religion as it's all the same and it's all stupid and it's all just, it's ridiculous. But
no,
moving on from there to continue it on quickly there, just Mormonism to wrap this up, and I know we're going on a bit long here, but yes, Mormonism is a cult. I'm using right now CARM, which is the Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, just a list right now they've got there of the main notes on what is the non-biblical or non-Christian doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or also known as the LDS. And this is stuff that's directly supported that I can give you the exact page number and a book and whatnot, taken from Mormon writers and Mormon scriptures. Okay. Starting 1. God used to be a man on another planet. That is a Mormon tenet. That comes from Mormon Doctrine, page 321, and also Joseph Smith, Time and Seasons, volume 5, page 613 to 614, and Orson Pratt's Journal of Discourses, volume 2, page 345, and Brigham Young's Journal of Discourses, volume 7, page 333. Number 2, God resides near a star called Kolob. There we go. You see the UFO cult stuff coming back in again there? That's from the Pearl of Great Price, page 34 and 35, and Mormon Doctrine, page 423. Number 3, the Father has, this is a quote, this is from Doctrines and Covenants, 130-22. Quote, the Father has a body of flesh and bones as tangible as man's, meaning that God is a physical form of a dude. Not that, like, man is made in the image of God, but that God is a man. Mm-hmm. Also, just saying later here, God is in the form of a man. That's Joseph Smith's Journal of Discourses, volume 6, page 3. And here's another quote here, Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, page 345, quote, God himself was once as we are now, and is an exalted man, and sits enthroned in yonder heavens, exclamation points. We have imagined that God was God from all eternity. I will refute that idea and take away the veil so that you may see. Next here, number 6. After you become a good Mormon, you have the potential of becoming a god. That's Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, page 345 to 347, as well as page 354. Number 7. There is a mother god. This is from Articles of Faith by James Talmage, page 443, which adds a little bit extra weirdness there. And then also number 8, keep it going. God is married to his goddess wife and has spirit children. And that's angels and whatnot, is what that comes from. And that's Mormon Doctrine, page 516. And finally here, the Trinity is 3 separate gods, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That these three are separate individuals physically distinct from each other is demonstrated by the accepted records of divine dealings with man. And that's from Articles of Faith, again, by James Talmage, page 35. And literally just to contrast that with Bible teachings, the Bible teaches that God has always been God and was never a man. That's Psalms 90-2. The Bible nowhere says that he lives near another star, or that the Father has a body of flesh and bones, which Christ contradicted in John 4:24 and Luke 24:39. Also, we do not have the potential of becoming gods because there are no gods formed. Isaiah 43:10, 44:6, as well as 8 and 45:5, and finally that the Trinity is one God. That's Deuteronomy 6:4, not 3.
That could be a bit confusing for some people, though, because Jesus is described as God's Son on Earth.
Yeah,
and the Trinity is described as one.
Yeah,
so some people could interpret that as that Jesus was the God on Earth, basically.
Yeah, well, agreed. But that's the original thing of the Trinity. There is that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost sort of a deal is actually one physical entity. Of that Jesus is essentially a physical incarnation of God on Earth, but that what he was spiritually a aspect of God in the beginning, and that like himself or the Holy Spirit, when early in Genesis, God says let us look of what we've seen there or whatever, that when he's talking about us or we in a multiple sense there, he wasn't actually talking to the angels, but to Jesus and the Holy Ghost there of a multiple aspects of God, which would lead one to see also why the Johovah or the Tetragrammaton God of the Old Testament would be considered more of a father figure punishment sort of a figure rather than, and like a patriarchal figure rather than a forgiver, beseecher, what would one say, a more of a merciful figure as Jesus is. Fairly interesting sort of a deal there. Also, Mormonism and Freemasonry, there's all sorts of stuff with that there, as well as major Mormons being Masons as well.
Well, I suppose there's blurred lines between cults and secret societies as well as
always, because some secret societies are cults themselves. Cults are secret societies. Even here, the 1840s, Smith and several prominent Mormons had become Freemasons and founded a lodge in Nauvoo, Illinois. Soon after joining Freemasonry, Smith introduced a temple endowment ceremony, including a number of symbolic elements that were essentially identical to their analogs in Freemasonry. Smith remained a Freemason until his death. However, later Mormon leaders distanced themselves from Freemasonry. In modern times, the LDS Church, the predominant Mormon organization, holds no position for or against the compatibility of Masonry and LDS doctrine. I think that's pretty interesting. Also, the fact that Mormons, when they're married, are sealed together in marriage, which is actually antithetical to Christian teachings or heretical to Christian teachings, because you're not supposed to be sealed in anything. A sealing comes from witchcraft and Luciferianism.
And aren't Mormons encouraged to have as many children as possible?
Yeah, but that's similar to Catholics as well there, you'd say. But that is actually a real Christian doctrine there of go forth and be fruitful. However, that said, here we go. We've got a couple good, interesting things here to go with, along with sealing. Sealed for eternity, this is out of Russia Today as well. Sealed for eternity, end quote, to 40 wives. Mormon Church confirms founder's polygamy. That Joseph Smith Jr. Had up to 40 wives, the youngest of whom was only 14.
The polygamy thing's another confusing aspect, because in the Old Testament, the polygamy seemed to be quite prevalent as well.
Less prevalent in terms of numbers, though. People would have a couple wives there, but not 30 to 40. That's more like a harem, more along the lines of the satraps of old type thing.
Yeah, no, that's true, but it seems, I don't know if it's just my my perception, but it seems like a lot of Christians would think a polygamist would be sinful, but that was...
Agreed, it's actually not completely antithetical. However, that is another difference there between old form Judaism and new form Christianity. Although I will admit there, I'm not entirely sure whence it became an immediate thing of one-to-one, though really I don't care. I couldn't imagine there just to make light of the situation as a man there. You realize how much problem men have with a single wife. I could not imagine, unless it's a very patriarchal society with quite prevalent spousal abuse there that's accepted, how you're going to be able to deal with the problems in a rational way of 40 wives.
Well, it'd be too expensive as well, wouldn't it? I mean,
oh my God, that's insane. Unless these women are working as like your house servants or whatever and are little more than slaves, really, how are you going to be taking care of them, and how are they taking care of each other and the children? And oh my gosh.
But that brings us back to cults quite neatly as well, because there have been some maybe lesser known cults where the cult leader has taken many wives, and it does seem to be about sex, really getting as much sex as possible.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, a really good point of where the message there, the religious message or whatnot, isn't actually have really anything to do with the polygamy, so much as the polygamy just being a further extension of these. Well, let's be honest, in every case it's men that just want to have as much sex as possible with as many women as possible. Especially in this case, strangely enough, teenage girls, which is the really creepiest part about that.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing. I haven't heard of many female cult leaders, have you?
There are a couple, like Bonnie Nettles there with Marshall Applewhite for the Heaven's Gate thing and whatnot. So
but wasn't he the main leader, though? Or was
no, he was. He was. He founded it with her, but she died before she could make it. I believe she died in like the late 80s. whereas Applewhite went on for about another decade there before their great, whatever you say, great journey that they had to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's been any single female cult leader who's just specifically the head of the cult.
Probably not in the United States or the West there. I'd imagine probably in Asia or somewhere like that could be a case. And I'm sure there probably is a cult somewhere. It's just
actually,
not
saying that, what was the name of the one that started with?
What's her face? The Ransom lady. That's a great example.
Yeah, that's a great one to end on talking about, and end on the cults, the way we began. Yeah, I guess she is the female cult leader, isn't she?
Judith Zebra Knight. As you said there, Scott, very well. Don't trust anyone whose middle name is Zebra.
No, never. That's,
especially when they changed it to that. That's
a
crazy.
Golden rule I always stick by.
Always should. I encourage everybody. These guys, here we're going to cover NBC News, 534 women, children leave polygamous ranch. While this isn't entirely, these guys were not endorsed by... let's see, this is the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is an offshoot of the Mormon Church, and while they weren't actually endorsed by the mainstream Mormon Church, they still had a giant polygamous ranch going on there. Last thing to add for Mormonism is also that what makes it a cult is that specifically that people are what they call baptized by proxy or posthumously baptized all the way up to hundreds of years after their death.
That's strange, isn't it?
Meaning that, we can say that your soul is absolved of its sins and that you're born again in Christ and everything, even though you're dead and have nothing to do with this at all. Period.
Well, and that has always struck me a bit odd about the Catholic religion as well, where about the making people saints. How they then hunt, they decide they want to make someone a saint, so they hunt around for a couple of miracles. Yeah. They have to have performed at least 2 miracles, I think so. I've always just found it completely odd. It's like they've already decided they want to make that person a saint, so then they hunt around and go, well, he did pray for that guy once. Let's go and find out. Yeah, he seems okay. That's one. We need to find out one now.
I agree. That entire idea too puts all these people instead of Christ being the object of admiration there. It puts all these individuals who themselves, as we talked before, the saints and sinners are one and the same. Those people all had as much problems grappling with materialism and different sins of the flesh there as all of us. But I also agree with you of just sainthood in general seems asinine and contradictory to Christian doctrine, where people, it's about all of us regardless of how short we fall in our walk with God and with our walk with each other in our daily lives there, that we still pick ourselves up and keep going.
Well, yeah, I mean, I personally just don't think any other human should be worshipped. They're
including
just
the Pope, the Cardinals, any of that. Yeah,
well, including the royal family as well, which
Agreed. Well, that's what I have a quote here that I really think you would enjoy. It's not a super short quote, but it's by a guy named G.K. Chesterton. That one second here, load it up, and I think it's weird that you just brought that up because it's right there as far as the royal family or people that have all this money and everything. Here, quote, "Only the Christian Church can offer any rational objection to a complete confidence in the rich, for she has maintained from the beginning that the danger was not in man's environment, but in man. Further, she has maintained that if we come to talk of a dangerous environment, the most dangerous environment of all is the commodious environment. I know that the most modern manufacturer has been really occupied in trying to produce an abnormally large needle. I know that the most recent biologists have been chiefly anxious to discover a very small camel. But if we diminish the camel to its smallest, or open the eye of the needle to its largest, if, in short, we assume the words of Christ to have meant the very least they could have meant, his words must at very least mean this, that rich men are not very likely to be morally trustworthy. Christianity, even when watered down, is hot enough to boil all of modern society to rags. The mere minimum of the church would be a deadly ultimatum to the world. For the whole modern world is absolutely based on the assumption, not that the rich are necessary, which is tenable, but that the rich are trustworthy, which, for a Christian, is not tenable. You will hear everlastingly in all discussions about newspapers, companies, aristocracies, or party politics, this argument that the rich man cannot be bribed. The fact is, of course, that the rich man is bribed. He has already been bribed. That is why he is a rich man. The whole case for Christianity is that a man who is dependent upon the luxuries of this life is a corrupt man, spiritually corrupt, politically corrupt, financially corrupt. There is one thing that Christ and all the Christian saints have said with a sort of savage monotony. They have said simply that to be rich is to be in peculiar danger of moral wreck. It is not demonstrably unchristian to kill the rich as violators of definable justice. It is not demonstrably unchristian to crown the rich as convenient rulers of society. It is not certainly unchristian to rebel against the rich or to submit to the rich, but it is quite certainly unchristian to trust the rich, to regard the rich as more morally safe than the poor.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a good quote to finish on, really, and
Yep.
that seems to be referencing it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle.
Yep.
And hopefully tomorrow I'll see a few. Well, in the next couple of days I'll see some camels wandering around.
Oh, indeed, and also anytime, just to add there, you'd like to go over, if we ever have time, Kabbalah or anything, while you're there in Israel or upon a later episode, we can talk about that and go into any of a number of topics you'd like to cover there, brother.
Absolutely, and yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Seth. And yeah, definitely.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank your audience. Thank the rest of the members of the Truth Alliance there. Anybody that'd like to see some of my work, check out facebook.com/2realnews. That's the number 2 real news, as one word there at the end, and you'll be able to find it. We try and do original articles by all sorts of people, local and abroad there, independent people that wouldn't be picked up otherwise, and also links to all different sorts of news. And it's an honor joining you and your audience, and God bless you, and you have a great day there, and I will talk to you later.
Thanks, Seth, and we'll speak to you again soon. You definitely got to come back on again soon.
Oh, for sure.
Catch you later. Thanks to Seth, and I'm sure Seth will be back at some point to talk about another topic. We're also going to go over to Anthony, who will be talking about the Waco siege again, doing a bit more of an in-depth analysis. The Waco siege was a siege of a compound belonging to the religious group, of course, Branch Davidians. So this was the siege by American federal and Texas law enforcement and military between February the 28th and April the 19th, 1993. So over to Anthony, our academic researcher, formerly from the University of Bilkent, now conducting further research at the AGU State University in Kayseri, east of Cappadocia, in the shadow of the Urges volcano. Anthony.
Hi, how are you, Scott? I hear you're in Kiev.
Yep, I'm here in the centre of Kiev, not far from the Maidan. Yeah, quite nice. Had a look around. I've been to Kiev before, but never really spent more than a day here, and I've lived on the outskirts. But it's quite nice to be in the centre. I know you like Kiev, yeah?
Yeah, I love it. It's probably one of my favourite cities in Eastern Europe, which is saying a lot.
How's things with you, anyway?
Oh, pretty good. I've been looking into this Waco thing, which we talked about a little last week. Seth brought up some really interesting stuff, I thought. I really enjoyed that report. But I wanted to look at a few different aspects of it tonight, if we could.
Yeah, that'd be
because
great.
I think it was actually a huge event. I mean, in terms of the history of cults, which we've been talking about. And perhaps you could even say it was a turning point for the US in terms of its political climate and so on. I was recently watching David Knight from InfoWars. You know this guy, yeah?
Yep. He stands in for Alex Jones quite often on a Friday, I believe.
Yeah, and he was talking about Waco and saying that a lot of the stuff that we've seen coming out of Washington in the last 20 years, be it the Patriot Act or whatever, can be seen as part of the post-Waco period of US politics. And I think there's probably some truth to that. So, hoping we can delve into some of that tonight. So I thought I should start with the basics, because I was recently having a chat with a Scottish friend of mine. Told her that I was researching Waco, and she said, "Oh, what's Waco?" So I thought, okay, all right, I'll throw in the biographical details. So basically, in 1993, you had a religious cult called the Branch Davidians living on a compound in a place called Mount Carmel, which is just outside of the town of Waco in Texas. And their leader was a guy called David Koresh. he claimed to be the Lamb, which is mentioned in chapter 5 of the book of Revelations. Is it not to be confused with the Lamb of God, which Christians like to use as a title for Jesus. These are two different things, although some people at the time got the perception that Koresh was claiming to be the Messiah. He wasn't. His job in Revelations was to open the 7 seals, and in doing that, he would trigger a sequence of events that would culminate in a huge battle and then, the end of the world. So up to that point, a fairly standard cult. Yeah. But there were a couple of things which made the Branch Davidians different, and one of them was the gun culture of the group, which had been part of their lifestyle, I think, since the beginning. So Koresh and other members of the Branch Davidians were trading in arms. Their compound supported more than 100 people, and the guns were partly funding this. So they were, setting up stalls at gun shows. They were quite out there in the public eye. And they were stockpiling arms on their property as well, which was happening a lot at that time with, militia groups, survivalist communities, and so on. So they made it onto the radar of a government agency called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, the ATF. And the ATF claimed that the cult was buying semi-automatic weapons, which are, in themselves pretty nasty things, and then converting them into fully automatic weapons, which would be like military issue.
You mean pretty nasty if you get shot by one?
Yeah, pretty nasty if you get shot by one. And both kinds, but especially the fully automatic kind, can discharge a lot of ammunition in a very short time, as you'll see if you go onto WikiLeaks and watch the US military using them on civilians and journalists. But so yeah, as we know, only governments and military organizations are wise and mature enough to handle those things. so they're highly illegal in the US, and it's a serious criminal offense if you're caught trying to convert another kind of weapon into an automatic weapon. So on the 20th of February, 1993, which was just over a month after Bill Clinton's inauguration, so the ATF in February of 1993 went up to Mount Carmel with a search warrant. Yeah. They tried to serve the warrant, and according to the official story, they did so peacefully, but this heavily armed psychotic cult immediately responded with a barrage of gunfire. Yeah? And in the course of defending themselves, 2 ATF officers were killed and another 2 died later from their injuries. Now, we know for a fact that this official story is, well, let's say it contains some elements of fiction.
That's putting it politely, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, this raid on the 28th of February was not a one-sided thing at all. What you really had was a pitched gun battle. The government went up there for a firefight and they got it. But it's interesting if we just take a little detour back to last week. When you read about this on websites maintained by the anti-cult movement, what's missing is that 6 Branch Davidians died in that exchange. So you had 4 fatalities on the ATF side and 6 on the Branch Davidian side. But these religious organizations, the anti-cult movement that purport to be all about helping people, they often use Waco as their example of a kind of creepy, dangerous cult. And when they do, they usually just gloss over the casualties which the cult sustained. Mm-hmm. But sorry, that's a bit of a tangent. After that initial raid, the FBI got involved, and a siege started. The siege continued actually for 51 days, and it finally ended on the 19th of April in, I think, what you could only describe as tragic circumstances. The FBI assaulted Mount Carmel with tanks. They shot poison gas inside the compound, which was mostly made of wood, and then later in the day, a huge fireball suddenly engulfed the whole place and basically burned it out. 80 Branch Davidians died in the fire, which was the majority of them, and of those fatalities, 18 were children. There's documentary footage of their bodies, and it is stomach churning. I mean, they looked like lumps of coal, just completely black and unrecognizable, like plane crash victims. So whatever your take on this, it was a very dark day in US history. So as a viewer at home, you could just chalk it up to, crazy cult, psycho leader, mass suicide, another Jonestown, and just think no more about it. But, 21 years have passed since the FBI raid, and in that time we've learned that the real story was drastically different. What actually happened was, mass slaughter, mostly carried out on unarmed individuals with no connection to any kind of arms dealing or anything illegal. And it turns out that many of them didn't die in the fire, which is what the original reports said. They were shot and they were gassed to death, and in a few cases they were actually torn limb from limb using tank tracks, and all of this done by a government agency. Now, last week I compared the tactics of the FBI at Waco to the atrocities we've seen this year from ISIS, just in terms of their sheer brutality, and I wasn't kidding. It was unbelievably cruel what they did there. It went to a level that nobody could have predicted, and the truth of it emerged quite slowly over a number of years, because the agencies involved did their best to cover it up. They lost videotapes from surveillance cameras that were nearby. They removed pages from official logs, all kinds of stuff. But it has come out
so Anthony,
slowly, and it's been shocking to learn.
Are you saying they deliberately lost these things?
Scott, I would never suggest such a thing. But look, before a start, during the initial ATF raid, there were 3 members of the cult who were absent from the compound, and as they were making their way back, all of them were pulled over. 2 were arrested, but the other one was executed. That conclusion came initially from eyewitness reports on both sides, so ATF officers standing nearby and from cult members. And it would have been backed up immediately by an autopsy, but the autopsy was delayed because the ATF didn't bring the body in, which would be normal, law enforcement practice. They just rolled it into a ravine, and it wasn't found for almost a week. Yeah. And then when the FBI took over, they went much further. For example, we know Mount Carmel was an old building. There'd been a fire in there once before, but one of the rooms underneath the main building was an old library vault, and that had survived the earlier fire with minimal damage. So when the Branch Davidians realized that the FBI was shooting incendiary cartridges into their building, which they were, they sent all the women and children into the vault to, maximize their chances of survival. But then the FBI found a pipe that led into that room, and they pumped it full of CS gas for 2 whole hours. Now, CS is a lot worse than standard issue tear gas, and it's not too far removed from the kind of stuff that people like Bashar al-Assad like to use. It's technically a non-lethal gas, in the sense that you won't die if you get it in the face for a few seconds, but prolonged doses cause incredible pain. And the pain comes from a desperate attempt to breathe while toxins are shutting down your lungs, with a feeling of panic that goes along with it. And there is long-term damage as well.
Well, I think 2 hours worth would have serious consequences for anyone, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost unimaginable, the kind of agony that especially the kids in that vault went through. But it gets worse, Scott. After the gassing, FBI agents walked into the compound. They shot a couple of Branch Davidians who tried to stop them getting to the women and children. They placed an explosive device directly over the vault. They then left. The device detonated and killed most of the women and the kids inside.
Man, I hope some of these people got prosecuted, put in prison for this. Surely.
That's a whole other issue, and it's not. The answers would not please you, I can guarantee you. But look, if you can believe it, we're only about halfway through. Using infrared cameras, investigators have shown that the FBI was directing, or somebody was directing, machine gun fire into the building through the back door to chase people towards the flames. and incendiary cartridges were found on the site. Now, they knew that it was a wooden building, they knew that there were flammables inside, and firing an incendiary into that environment is basically murder by arson. And by the way, this is after the FBI had already subjected the Branch Davidians to several nights of psyop-style mental torture. You know, they'd set up speakers outside the compound. They were playing things like the sounds of animals yelping because they were being hit at unbelievable volumes all through the night, so nobody could sleep. Now, at the time when all of this came out, and like I said, it came out quite gradually, I think a lot of people were shocked that the FBI would use those kinds of tactics. But I think to us today, they have a kind of familiar ring to them, you know, because in our post-Waco era, they've become, you know, part of life. That we hear about these things from Guantanamo, from Diego Garcia, from Afghanistan, and so on. But remember, this was law enforcement, not military. So what were they doing? Using all this hardware and all this psyops stuff? Well, unfortunately, we do know the answer, because it turns out that not all of the protagonists at Waco were FBI or ATF. The Army was actually there as well. We didn't know this at the time, but we know it now, and that was totally unprecedented in the US. I mean, the law forbids the military from getting involved in domestic law enforcement.
Didn't because they have tanks there?
They did, yeah. But the FBI have tanks. But yeah, I mean, getting the army in, calling in the army would obviously be, you know, turning the troops on the people kind of thing. But in this case, there's a document trail and a ton of testimonials from military personnel, all showing that there were covert special ops people from the army, from the so-called Delta Force, in fact, that were co-running the operation. So you had, you know, army snipers, counter-terrorist specialists, all these people out there. And on the 2 days, they actually engaged the Branch Davidians in a firefight. So this is US citizens versus the US Army. And I think that's why David Knight and various others have said that the US government really turned a corner at that point. You know, at the time, they covered up the military nature of the operation because the public would have just been shocked, you know. But now you've got an America where, well, it's fairly common practice for the army to give hardware like tanks to local police departments, you know, and those things are now turning up on suburban streets. We're living now in the era of Ferguson and other incidents like that. So I think this is the post-Waco era that these guys are talking about.
Yeah, it really does sound like a massacre. I mean, do you think it was revenge, or is this something else? Well,
revenge is one motive that has been discussed. You know, 4 ATF agents lost their lives in the first raid, and perhaps their fellow law enforcement officers were incensed and decided to go in and teach the cult members a thing or two. But I feel like there's a lot more going on than that. You know, it seems a little bit Old West to me. But I want to give you my own theory about the motivations. But I also wanted to mention a couple of other reasons why I think this has become topical again. I mean, it has always been to a certain extent, but at the moment I think especially so. Last week we mentioned there's a cult forming in Australia at the moment around this guy Alan John Miller, who believes he's Jesus.
That's right.
And at least in some superficial ways, that group does seem to resemble the Branch Davidians. And we've seen the media have got hold of this, and they've started a beat-up campaign on this guy, making him look like public enemy number one. Now, I don't know where that will lead, but with the media involved and hungry for, you know, the next Waco to terrify their viewers so they'll never leave their homes unless they're going to shop, I think there's the potential for things to get really ugly there. So I think it's helpful.
I mean, the difference would be with the Australian one, there's no guns in the cult, is there, in this particular cult?
No, there isn't. But I think, unfortunately, you know, certain past incidents like Jonestown, Waco, Heaven's Gate, and so on, have left a kind of mark on the public consciousness, and now the media see the opportunity to beat up any group of people who go follow somebody calling himself Jesus, to beat them up into the next David Koresh. And so I think it's helpful to kind of look at past incidents and see if we can use those to gain some perspective on what's happening now. But also, in the US, Hillary Clinton's probably going to win the Democratic nomination next year, and there's a Hillary Waco connection that I want to talk about later. But I also think what's really interesting here is the psychology of cult leaders. Koresh is a very interesting case. He's cropped up in a few different fields of research, and the story of how he became the Branch Davidian leader is quite an entertaining one. If you like twisted tales, he didn't start the cult. He took it out. He took over the leadership, yeah. And there were some really weird events along the way. Like the previous leader was a guy named George Roden, and he exhumed the corpse of a deceased cult member called Anna Hughes, and then challenged Koresh to a necromancy contest. He did that because the leadership struggle between him and Koresh had become quite intense. So this guy Roden's idea was that they could settle it by seeing which of them could bring Anna Hughes back to life. Then Koresh and his followers went and stole the body, or tried to steal the body. That didn't work. They took some guns with them. They had a firefight. They ended up in court, charged with attempted murder. They all got off, but the other guy, George Roden, was doing such bizarre things in court that he ended up in prison, though it was him who brought the charges, and then was committed to a mental asylum. So
it does sound a bit dubious.
It's quite a colourful and bizarre history this cult has, and certainly there are no angels involved on any side of the story. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the why, I mean, why Koresh or why anyone would want to become a cult leader? Well, we've talked about a few of them in the last couple of weeks, and you do come across people like Marshall Applewhite from Heaven's Gate who just seem to be lunatics, But I don't think that's always the case. And, of course, the other reason you often hear is that they just love power, they get addicted to attention, they crave the exploitation and all that sort of stuff.
And, there seems to be... insanity seems to be part of it.
There's definitely some mental instability going in the mix, quite a lot. But I'm not sure all of the traditional explanations, like the power thing, the power trip, the insanity, I'm not sure they really capture the appeal. One possibly useful area of research concerns a thing called Jerusalem syndrome. And this is basically when a person visits Jerusalem, which you're going to on Thursday, right? Oh
God, am I going to become a cult leader?
I'm very interested to see what your reaction to Jerusalem will be, because this is quite a common thing. You would think it would be very specific and rare, but it isn't. So it's when a person visits Jerusalem. While they're there, they have a little revelation. And then they become convinced that they're either Jesus or a prophet or Mary or Satan or whatever.
If I do start acting strange after my trip, do let me know.
I will. Well, the good news is that Jerusalem syndrome does subside if you take the person out of Jerusalem.
I'm only staying there for 3 days. So. Well,
that's my plan. If I see photos of you in a loincloth preaching to a crowd, I'm on a plane. I'm going to get you out of the city. But no, the Israeli authorities take it quite seriously, because there have been some major incidents. There was one guy who tried to burn down the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which, is one of the holiest mosques in Islam. There was one guy who thought he was Samson and tried to move part of the Wailing Wall. So in Jerusalem, there is a psychiatric hospital called Kfar Saul. Remember that name, Scott. Kfar Saul. They specialize in treating the victims of this syndrome. And
really? This is actually a syndrome?
Yeah, it's not universally acknowledged. There's some argument about it, but it's quite widely acknowledged, and especially within Israel. But it tends to happen to a particular kind of person. I'm not sure you qualify. Often this person is suffering from some other kind of mental condition, and generally they've had an extremely religious upbringing, but they've then, found themselves drifting away from the faith in adult life. So then they go to Jerusalem, and they get just kind of overwhelmed by the atmosphere there, and they start believing that they, have a message for humankind or a vision of the apocalypse or whatever. Now, from what we know about...
Is this the case with David Koresh, then?
Yeah. For a start, it does seem like he had a very religious upbringing, but then in his teens, he got heavily into rock music. He played in bands for quite a while. He had a lot of contacts in the music scene in California, even after he became a cult leader. And he's actually been described as a very, very good rock guitarist. So we lost a good guitarist, unfortunately.
Damn it.
Yeah. And also, in 1983, he did, in fact, visit Jerusalem. And according to some... scholars who've studied the Waco situation, you can pinpoint that year as the time when he started believing that he was appointed by God, which would mean that if there is a connection, this delusion, which ended up taking over his whole life, may have started there. So Scott, I just want to say to you, when you go, be very careful.
I will now for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot these epiphany experiences are very common among cult leaders. Not all cult leaders have them, but many do. We talked last week about Claude Vorilhon from the Raelian cult, the UFO cult. His epiphany came from a UFO inside a volcanic crater. But it was similar in that it's one moment which determines his entire future and what he does with his life. And there are plenty of other examples of that. But again, even if they're made up, it's a single defining moment which has incredibly far-reaching consequences. So I think that's very interesting. I think it's an area which deserves looking into perhaps a little more. But I also think Koresh was a man of his time in some ways. And that's a kind of a banal phrase, but I think it's true. There are arguably certain elements in American culture that set the stage in a way for figures like Koresh to crop up. I mean, if you look at how his beliefs developed, he started off thinking that this final showdown between good and evil was going to happen in Israel. Yeah. So again, careful, Scott. but then later he became more and more convinced that it would happen in America. Now, that particular belief has been around for a long time, and it has a name. It's called the Jeremiad, this idea that the apocalypse will happen in America. In fact, the first people who talked about this were actually the original Puritans who colonized the US in the 17th century. So the Jeremiad doctrine has been part of American culture right from the start. And you see it in everyone, from the Mormons, the People's Temple. It's in a lot of different spiritual beliefs in America. But you also had in the 1980s something quite new, which was the televangelist phenomenon. You remember those guys on late night TV talking about God and how Jesus is going to deliver the good and punish the wicked? You remember those guys?
Yeah, and they tried to raise a lot of money.
Yes, and there were a few of them. There were a few very, very successful ones. Several of the most successful, like the Reverend Jerry Falwell, they hit on this very seductive new formula, which was kind of combining this Jeremiad doctrine with a kind of almost a form of gun worship, I think you could say. So there was a kind of reinvigoration of this idea that citizens had to arm themselves for a coming battle, and the federal government was involved in that. They kind of became the forces of Armageddon, the forces that would fight against God's people in this confrontation. And I think partly because of that, Falwell and the others were hugely successful in getting guns onto the agenda in the US and presenting like this mortal threat to the Second Amendment, which, as you know, this is the document which guarantees citizens the right to bear arms, so that if their government becomes tyrannical, they can resist and uphold democracy and so on and so on. Uh-huh. But so I mentioned before, Koresh was stockpiling guns and also selling them, and there were a lot of small kind of off-the-grid communities doing that in the late 80s. You know, all these survivalist guys, these anti-government guys, they were all preparing for the gun battle. Yeah, and I think, you know, to be fair, it was partly to do with a kind of pre-millennial feeling, you know, so certain hysteria that was building at the time. But I also think that it related to this apocalyptic confrontation theme, and the televangelists certainly had a role in that. So I think, at least to a small extent, Koresh kind of grew out of that context. And when you look at the assault that brought him down in the end, you wonder whether it might have even been a kind of symbolic crackdown on the kind of militia philosophy. You know, that the government's answer to the challenge that all these groups were posing at that point, saying, we are going to arm ourselves against you. And in fact, I think given the brutality that we talked about before, you could even go one step further and speculate about why the Democrats would have been so harsh on a tiny organization like the Branch Davidians. Remember, Clinton had just been elected, you know, and there was clearly the potential to end this standoff peacefully. The FBI had cult experts out there, you know, and they knew, they were very well versed in the Branch Davidian philosophy. And Koresh had made some innovations to it, but they were completely up to date on his thinking. So he'd been saying for years that his mission on Earth was to open these 7 seals, and after the ATF raid, he revealed in hostage negotiation, in siege negotiation, he revealed that God had spoken to him and given him directions about how he could open the seals. It turned out that they were actually scriptural texts, so opening them meant writing them. And so after the ATF raid, he sat down and he got started on the writing, and not long before the FBI assaulted Mount Carmel, he told FBI negotiators that he'd finished the first seal and he was some way into writing the second one. He also told them that once they were all finished, God had commanded his people to come out of the building voluntarily and give themselves up. So in other words, if the FBI had wanted a peaceful end to this, they would have put all their efforts into verifying Koresh's claims about the seals, and then if he really was writing them, then they would have worked towards convincing him that yes, the seals are getting out there, we're disseminating them into the community so people can hear your message, and that may not have diffused the crisis, there's no guarantees, but it certainly would have, you know, opened the door.
It seems like there was very little attempt to protect the women and children in this cult, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And the cult experts, meanwhile, the ones in the FBI, they were jumping up and down furiously and saying, 7 seals, 7 seals. This is what you need to do. Like play on his terms, and this is going to work. We're going to get them out. But the Bureau were just ignoring these guys. And sometimes, on occasion, they would take advice from the cult experts and then do the opposite of whatever they recommended, as if, you know, they were trying to provoke something. So, you know, you have to ask, what was the point? Why would they do that? Was it really revenge, like we were talking about before? I don't know. It's difficult to say, but I think from the Democrats' perspective, I suspect the issue was much bigger than just dealing with this one weird cult.
Were they trying to use them as an example? Basically sort of saying, you know, if any of these militia groups rise up or arm themselves too much, this is what's gonna happen to you.
Well, I think that might be true. Actually, interestingly, the American political comedian Bill Maher made a comment on his TV show about this last year. He quoted a survey in which 44% of Republican voting respondents said that they thought an armed revolution might be necessary within the next few years. That was last year. So again, this kind of relates to the Second Amendment. Yeah. And then he went on to basically, you know, take the piss out of them. He ridiculed anybody who thinks the Second Amendment is actually still relevant nowadays. And I'll quote a little bit of what he says because I think it's quite interesting. He says, people who think that the Second Amendment start again. People think that the Second Amendment protects them from tyranny, but didn't Waco solve that? You know what they had in Waco? They had 1.9 million rounds of ammunition. They had 50 caliber machine guns. They had grenades. And what did the government have? The government had everything else. So the winner and still champion is the United States government. That's what he said. Now, Maher wasn't arguing that the Democrats were up to anything at Waco, but I think he may have stumbled onto that argument. Because these days, even if you could somehow get all the militias together under one banner, they still wouldn't have anything like the firepower that they need to stop the US government if it turned tyrannical, which of course we know it never would. but see, in these debates, Republicans tend to ignore that. You know, they still talk up the Second Amendment as if it does still have that relevance, and as if the citizenry, you know, would stand a chance if they suddenly decided to rise up. So this is my theory.
Yeah, but I still think, yeah, if they were just going to attack one group, then of course the US military would have a massive advantage. But if you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and thousands of groups all the way across the country, then they're not, you know, it doesn't matter how much firepower they're going to have, US government. But if you had militia all over the country, then that would create massive problems for the US government and the military. They wouldn't have the manpower. Maybe they'd have the equipment, they just wouldn't have the manpower. It would just, I mean, it'd be the end of the whole country, wouldn't it be? It'd be a full-scale civil war, and that's what I think people feel they would have in response to if the government got out of control, you know.
Yeah, and I think well, this is very speculative, but this is my theory. I think that in the early 90s, when the Clintons came to power, certain elements within the administration were thinking about exactly what you've just said, and so they immediately decided, okay, let's stop this militia stuff right now. Let's take down one of these groups in such a decisive way that there'll be an example, that everyone will get the point, and the idea of bearing arms against the US government will just seem ridiculous. Yeah. And they may have even thought that in doing this, it might take the advantage away from Republicans in the gun control debate. Yeah. And of course we know that if a government sees political advantage, they'll wipe out 100 citizens with no qualms at all. So I think, you know, when you hear how far up the chain of command responsibility for Waco goes, and it does go right to the top, I think this could be why. As I said, it's pure speculation, but I think it's worth looking into, because it seems more plausible than anything else I've heard. You know, on the truth movement side, you've got the revenge scenario, which we talked about before. Then on the opposite side, well, we've seen the anti-cult movement trying to paint Koresh as this kind of serial child rapist, for which there's no evidence at all. But
mind you, you did mention that he was sort of involved with a bit of a face-off with the other guy regarding a dead corpse. I mean, that is pretty. Oh, yeah. That is pretty odd.
Yeah, no, he was certainly, as I said, there were no angels in Mount Carmel. This was a guy who would himself get involved in a firefight, you know, for anything that he believed in, and basically the main thing he believed in was himself. And so
again, I would say, yeah, this was a total massacre, and you know, the government are responsible for this. But then David Koresh is as well.
My perspective on it is David Koresh was a dangerous guy, and David Koresh was an unstable person, and certainly anybody who had a family member involved in his religious organization, anyone who had a family member in the Branch Davidians, had every reason to be concerned. But I would not go the next step and say they all deserved to be wiped from the face of the earth.
Absolutely not, and it's quite obvious that the US government and the police were not trying to save the cult members. They were not there to try to take them away from this evil man. You know, that there was no attempt to do that at all.
No. There was absolutely none. It was the opposite. So so this is what makes me wonder whether there was a political point that the Democrats were trying to make. And if that's the case, then I think it's a deeply cynical exercise, and I think that more attention deserves to be paid to that, because this is not something that could never happen again. But look, two more things just before I finally, shut up about this topic. First of all, there's a filmmaker called Mike McNulty who's been researching Waco pretty much ever since it happened. His most recent documentary about it was in 2011, and in that documentary he talked about a guy called Vince Foster. Now, Foster was the White House's liaison for the Waco siege, and 90 days after the siege ended, Foster committed suicide. According to Foster's wife, her husband had been depressed for some time, and the main reason was that he was deeply troubled by the deaths of the children at Waco and the government's official story. So, we can see slight echoes of David Kelly here, I think.
Definitely, I was just thinking that.
But he felt responsible in some way because he was the one collating all this information. He had some role in the FBI's response to the situation, and this all contributed, according to his wife, it all contributed to his suicide. Now, a standard result of something like this would be that the FBI would regard Foster's office as a crime scene, and they would go in there and do a search, which they did. But when they did that, it was clear that some documents were missing from Foster's office, and these were records connected to the Waco incident. In fact, a whole box of them.
I hope you're not suggesting foul play again.
I am not, Scott, of course. I never would. But these records, they most likely included correspondence from President Clinton authorizing military involvement in Waco, and also photographic records of the victims, NSA correspondence, and various other things. So a bit later, the US Congress heard testimony from an intern that the First Lady's Chief of Staff had instructed him to take that box to the White House to be reviewed by the First Lady. And after he'd done that, that box disappeared. It's never been recovered. So here's the situation. It looks like Clinton may have ordered the military down to Waco and then had his wife cover that up for him. So Hillary has been through the documentary records of a man who killed himself because of the things that were in that file.
Wait, Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
Hillary Clinton is a lovely lady. She would never do anything wrong.
I know, she spars with talk show hosts. How can she be evil? But if you think about it, we're talking potentially photographic evidence of children whose bodies were dismembered and charred so badly that they actually crumpled when officers at the crime scene tried to pick them up. And also in the file, discussion of the effects of CS gas on children. And discussion of how machine gun fire could be used to herd civilians into a particular place where the FBI needed them to be. And execution and any number of other horrific things that happened at Waco. And she dumped it. She shredded it. She threw it into the Hudson River. She burned it. Whatever she did. So it's Hillary who's probably done more than anyone else to prevent any kind of closure from being reached with Waco.
And yet she'll still be elected. I can't understand why anyone would vote for that woman at all.
Well, yeah, but she's almost certain to get the Democratic nomination. Yeah, and if she does, I think it's worth bearing this in mind, because if she's on the bill, when you're at the polling station, it may be a good idea to just picture Hillary sitting in the White House and holding a photo of a 2-year-old child burned to death, and rather than thinking the American people must know the truth about this, she thinks we have to get rid of this. And then imagine her incinerating the photo of that child. Then after that, see if you can get a clear picture in your mind's eye of the other candidate doing the same thing. I just think that it's worth thinking about it, because I think that's actually not a bad basis on which to vote. If there's a choice between a candidate who you know is okay with the incineration of young children for political advantage, and then one who you think might not be okay with that, then I think that would make it a bit easier to choose. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about Waco, except to mention again that we're going to keep our eye on what happens in Northern Australia, and if there's any signs that either Alan John Miller is about to, get all his followers to drink the Kool-Aid, or the media manages to provoke some kind of community reaction or government reaction, and things are looking like they're moving in a Waco direction, then we'll try to be among the voices who mention this and are screaming about this before it goes too far.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So we're gonna keep tracking that one, because I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it all turns out.
Well, looking at some of his followers, I'm not sure it's going to turn out well, to be honest.
No, I don't think so either. I think there's definite reason for concern there.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. But anyway, look, Scott, hope you have a great time in Israel.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if you start to believe that you can move the Western Wall, just remember you're not the first.
I'll check myself into that hospital you were talking about.
Yeah, what was it called again? We better go back and check the name. It was Kfar Saul, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm adding it to my contacts list.
Me too.
All right. It was good to talk to you as always.
Yeah, thank you. We had a few technical problems tonight, but we managed to get there in the end, and it should make a good episode, I hope.
I hope so too.
So let's chat again in the coming weeks.
Yeah, you've got a guy coming on next week about talking about the Nephilim, yeah?
Well, we've got a couple of people coming on talking about anything related to Israel and Egypt. So if the Nephilim come up, then all well and good.
I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, it should be cool, actually.
All right, well, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, catch you later.
Okay, Yul Julaklar. It means bon voyage.
I knew that.
See you.
See you later.
Bye.
As ever, let us know your views. Remember, blind belief in authority is the greatest enemy of truth. Albert Einstein. Don't forget to donate if you can. T-shirts also available. Just make a donation over sort of $20 or more and add some extra for postage and packing. Contact us by email first with your size and address, and we can talk about the cost, and you can give them to your friends for presents at Christmas time. As well as Truth Sentinel t-shirts, we've also teamed up with a t-shirt company who produce their own political t-shirts, and you'll see a few pictures up on this channel, on this episode even. Basically, use the code TRUTH1 on their website, truthtshirts.com. You get a 10% discount, and they also donate £2.50 to us every time you make a donation. Don't forget to come and say hi, get in contact on Facebook, Twitter, email scottsentinel9@gmail.com, and we're on most channels like Facebook and Twitter. You can either look under Truth Sentinel or Scott Sentinel, and our website is at scottsentinel9.wix.com/Truth Sentinel. That's scottsentinel9.wix.com/Truth Sentinel. Topics coming up in future episodes will be Scientology next, probably. We'll have a look at the Egyptian pyramids, going to see Egypt next week, and there'll be episodes like on time travel, the Dyatlov Pass incident, parallel universes. We've got someone to come and talk about Noah's Ark. Phil will be coming up soon to talk about Utopia. on some episodes coming soon. We'll talk about revolution. We'll meet up with the Truth Alliance and discuss world events. Any sponsors or advertisers, please get in contact. ScottSentinel9@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Have a good week. Catch you later. Goodbye.